Hi, I'm Lynn Bruton.
And I'm John Bruton.
And we're volunteers for the Literacy Council of Frederick County. We're here to present the comprehension topic that's part of the Tutor Training, Review, and Enrichment series. The ultimate goal for comprehension is to understand what you read. Good readers use specific comprehension skills and strategies to build understanding. A skill is the ability to perform a task, for example, understand what is read. And a strategy is a systematic plan to acquire that ability. We'll talk about both in this section. We'll review the principles of teaching comprehension and show you some of the teaching strategies, including directed silent reading and think aloud techniques. We'll also talk about using various skills and strategies before, during, and after reading. Then we'll look at using graphic organizers as a strategy to build many skills.
Comprehension is the fourth component of reading instruction. Let's say we know the letters and sounds, we know the words, and we read smoothly. That doesn't necessarily mean we understand what we just read. By learning and using comprehension strategies, your student will become a better and more confident reader. The first principle of reading comprehension is that we read to understand. Depending on what the purpose is and whether the text is fiction, nonfiction, or poetry, we use different strategies to help build understanding. Alphabetics, vocabulary, and fluency skills are important, but for good comprehension, a student needs to have enough background knowledge and life experience to establish a context. Without context, students will not be engaged. Teaching comprehension is important for both basic literacy students who already speak English and for ESL students who are learning English. One of our basic literacy students was able to read items from a 5th grade word list, but was not able to answer any comprehension questions about a story written at a 2nd grade level. This is an example of a student who needs help with comprehension. Another example is an ESL student from Korea who could read English fluently, but she understood very little of what she'd read. When she took English in high school and college in Korea, she was taught to memorize English words and learn how to spell and pronounce them. That was just about all she'd learned. However, not much about how to understand or use English. One strategy for teaching comprehension is to ask questions that will show you for sure whether your student understands. For example, if you ask, "Do you understand this paragraph?" Students will often say yes, just to please you, but you don't really know if they do understand. If you ask instead, "How do you think Susie felt?" the student might not answer because they didn't understand the text. Or, especially for an ESL student, they might not understand the question. Maybe they don't know the word felt, or might not have enough vocabulary to respond. So then you need to ask the question in a different way. Don't just reword the question, "What were her feelings?" Now the student is embarrassed twice by not being able to answer. It's better to ask in a way that gives them some support, like asking an either-or question. Do you think Susie was happy or sad? This way you're giving the student support by helping them understand what felt means and also providing 2 vocabulary words that they might be searching for. Or ask a yes or no question. Do you think Susie was happy? Basically, when you don't get an answer from an open-ended question, make sure the follow-up question is more direct and easier to answer. And be sure when you say something that your student doesn't understand, that you don't just repeat what you said more loudly.
Being able to identify the main idea and make decisions about which details are important and which are not helps comprehension. Identifying the main idea may be particularly challenging for basic literacy students who may have had very little previous practice or success in summarizing. All levels of students use sequences in their everyday lives. They may follow a recipe or a procedure at work. Teaching key words like before, next, and after will help them get events in the proper order, and that leads to better understanding. Understanding the relationship between cause and effect helps students identify main ideas in news articles, history books, and biographies, as well as fiction. This requires knowledge of words such as before, then, afterwards, because, and since, as well as understanding how these words change the overall meaning. The ability to compare, to look at how things are the same, and contrast, to look at how things are different, usually go together. For example, when you are shopping, you want to choose between two products, and so you compare features while you contrast prices. Additionally, knowing how to tell fact from opinion is a critical skill for accurately understanding information. Finally, good readers know how to make inferences and draw conclusions as they read. Ask questions that encourage students to think about outside the text or read between the lines and to draw on past experiences and knowledge. This is a good strategy to improve comprehension skills.
Directed silent reading is an activity that involves asking a question ahead of time so your student is looking for the answer as he reads. This technique can be used at any time with any text your student is reading, and no matter their reading level. When a student has trouble understanding what they're reading, it can be helpful to use very simple material below their reading level, or work on comprehension at the end of a lesson after you know they can comfortably read all the words. A teacher could ask direct questions based on simple statements, such as the one on this slide. For example, the tutor could ask, what does Anne give to Bob? What does Anne give to Cal? In a real lesson, you could then ask your student to read the entire paragraph aloud. Some beginning level students may have difficulty with silent reading. In that case, you could still ask a question ahead of the reading, but have the student read the passage out loud so that you can help him if he gets stuck on a word, and then have him answer the question. Think Aloud is a great tool for explicit instruction. In a Think Aloud, you read a short passage aloud to your student and then tell the student what you are thinking while showing different reading comprehension strategies. These strategies might include asking questions, predicting, or finding information by making inferences. The Think Aloud technique allows students to see the mental strategies a good reader uses. Let's now look at the 4 steps of the Think Aloud. Step 1 is to tell the student, we are going to read a story and I will teach you about asking questions, predicting and making inferences by letting you know what I am thinking as we read the story. Step 2 is to set the purpose for reading and be clear about it with the student. For example, you might say, this story is a fiction, meaning that it is not real, so we are reading just for pleasure. Step 3 is to read the story or article and model the strategies you want to teach by stopping during the reading and thinking out loud. It's important to plan for when you'll stop and what you'll say. It is okay, and even preferred, to show that the thinking process is not perfect. For example, you might make predictions that are wrong. The last step is to discuss which strategy you used. If it's a longer reading selection, pick a good stopping point to review the strategies used so far, then continue with the reading. Ask your student if they can think of other things they've read where that strategy would be useful. As Lynn demonstrates the Think Aloud technique, listen for the strategies used to teach specific skills. We will use a very simple story for the demonstration.
Imagine that you are eavesdropping on a session with my basic literacy student who is fluent in English. I am thinking aloud to model for my student, first off, how to determine my purpose for reading. Bob is late. Well, this is the title of the story. It tells me that something happened to Bob. He's late for something. The picture shows a crowded traffic situation. This makes me think that maybe Bob is late for an appointment and he's worried about getting there on time. As I read, I hope to find out why he is late. Was he late because of the traffic? Bob woke up at 9 o'clock. He was late for his first job. He hoped Mr. Jones would not fire him. Bob got a ride with a friend named Eddie. His friend Eddie did not have a job yet. Well, so now we know that Bob is not late for an appointment. He's late for work. The story says he woke up at 9 o'clock. That tells me he was probably supposed to wake up earlier, like 8 o'clock. He must have slept in. Ooh, I wonder if Bob might get fired if he's late from work. From my own experience, I know that you can get in trouble for being late, but not usually fired. It seems extreme. So maybe Bob just worries a lot. But Bob got a ride with a friend named Eddie. His friend Eddie did not have a job yet. So what else can I learn? Eddie said to Bob, "Is Mr. Jones going to fire you?" Well, why does Eddie think Bob might get fired? It seems like Bob might have a good reason to be worried after all. Maybe something is going on. Maybe this isn't the first time Bob has been late. I'll keep reading to learn more. Oh, I hope not, said Bob. I hate the job, but I need the money. If I had a lot of money, I would quit. Well, it's making a little bit more sense now. Bob clearly doesn't like his job, and he might even hope to get fired. I know that when someone doesn't like a job, they usually don't do it as well as someone who does. Maybe he doesn't do his job very well. Well, if you get fired, let me know, said Eddie. Mike is going to the park with me at 10 o'clock. You can go with us if you do get fired. Oh, now I would think to myself, this is interesting. It seems that Eddie doesn't take getting fired very seriously. I wonder how Bob feels about going to work instead of going to the park with his friends. He probably wishes he could go with him. Mr. Jones did fire Bob, so Bob rode to the park with Eddie and Mike. Well, now I would think to myself, so Bob really did get fired. That is what happens when someone is late for work too many times. But I still think this is an extreme reaction. It's likely that there are other causes as well. The story said that Bob doesn't like his job. Maybe he wasn't a good employee. The story isn't very clear on this. Bob knew his friends were going to the park, and I'm sure he felt it would be a lot more fun than just going to work.
This simple story had several opportunities to develop reading comprehension skills. For example, one inference that you could draw early on in this story is that Bob and Eddie were both quite young and inexperienced. The text would also be fairly easy to summarize since the cause and effect is very linear. Also, for a beginning reader, this text provides a good opportunity for summarizing. So in this single think aloud activity, we modeled several comprehension strategies, including setting a purpose, asking a question, making predictions, summarizing, and making inferences. Just as we do when teaching vocabulary, we can divide teaching comprehension strategies into three parts: things to do before reading, things to do during reading, and things to do after reading. Some techniques can be used in all three stages, such as making predictions, asking questions, and making personal connections. Others work best during a particular stage. This chart gives a few examples. Take a look at the strategies that are useful before reading. These are all about actions that independent readers do most automatically before reading. Now look at the strategies used during reading. During reading, it is important to teach students to read in chunks. Most texts have natural chunks, such as paragraphs, sections, changes in scenes, or chapters that add more meaning than just individual words. Now look at the strategies to use after reading. Summarizing can be applied to smaller parts of the text as you read, or you can summarize the whole thing after you are finished. Summarizing is important because the student must rephrase using their own words to tell a shorter version. This is a good test of the student's understanding, so much so that our coordinators ask a student to read a short story and then tell them what the story was about as part of their assessment. The student's response tells us if they need help with comprehension. A KWL chart is a 3-column graphic organizer to write what you already know about a topic in the first column, what you want to know in the second column, and what you just learned by reading about the topic in the third column. This puts information into very usable format and can be helpful for planning at the beginning of a new topic. The KWL chart is primarily used when reading for knowledge. It can be used for any level of text from very basic GED level students. Imagine that your student is reading an article about safety planning for the home and family. This is how you know your student might set up a KWL chart. First, your student lists things they already know about home safety in the first column. Next, your student will write what they want to know about reading the article. Then they write what they learned from the article in the third column. Your student can add items to the second and third columns as they read. After they finish reading, they can also use the third column to summarize what they learned. After reading an informational article, you might divide the information into different categories. From this article, the specific safety recommendations for fire, power outage, and tornado or hurricane can be sorted out. Graphic organizers are very effective for this.
Here's another example of a KWL chart using a biography of Alexander Hamilton. Educational research studies have shown that students retain details and understand topics better if they can interact with the content. KWL can also serve as an after-reading assessment of what the student has learned from reading a single selection or from a whole unit of study. Another useful graphic organizer is the Venn diagram, which helps students visualize similarities and differences between two concepts. In this case, the two groups being compared and contrasted are whales and fish. The overlapping section shows traits that the two groups have in common, while the other sections show unique traits. With beginning students, you may need to help them define the name of the groups and let them fill in the information. This technique helps students develop comparing and contrasting skills, as well as critical thinking skills. The key purpose of this topic has been to show you ways that you can integrate all 4 components of reading: alphabetics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, to help your student become an independent reader. As you teach your student about comprehension, think about what you, as a good reader, already do before, during, and after reading. You can help your student visualize these things through diagrams. You can walk through these questions to guide them, or use other strategies that we have talked about that good readers use automatically to understand what they are reading. I hope that you have enjoyed this information on teaching comprehension, and I hope it helps you and your student in future lessons. Thank you for listening.